I'd love for you to bring to the front of your mind the best job you've ever had. Does it spring to mind? Is it right there? Can you remember the best job you've ever had? If it's not, the one that you're currently in. Okay. And in that job, I'd love to bet that it was also the workplace where you had the most fun work colleague that you've ever worked with. Am I right? Because this person had your back and had you laughing so hard that you could barely breathe. You knew how each other thought. You probably had inside jokes, fake names for everyone, like pet names, disparaging names for everyone. And I bet your boss was rolling their eyes whenever you two had gotten together, in a meeting or on a project or something like this. They're going, oh, fuck, here comes trouble. Am I right? Because it's these types of people, the ones who can get you through anything, even a really shitty work day, work week, work month, work year, and still have you super grateful to have them in your presence. It kind of doesn't matter what happens at work with these people. They always make it okay. They bring their best energy, and together you nut through any problems that come your way. Imagine if you could have that amazing workmate, that work colleague replicated. There's a lot of them. There's one for every wedding vendor that you want to book in for your big day, right? So your wedding photographer, that work colleague is your officiant, your venue owner, your hairdresser, your makeup artist, the person who sells you your wedding dress, wedding suit, wedding attire, whatever the hell it is. Imagine having that amazing connection, that fun, and knowing that they understand you. This doesn't have to be pie in the sky. This doesn't have to be something so outrageous to think of, because most of the very best wedding vendors that I've worked with over the past 15 years, and before I was even a celebrant in hotels, in events, in hospitality, there are definitely people, professionals, who will move heaven and earth so you get what you want and you have a bloody brilliant day, whether it's your wedding or way back when I was a waitress and we're just schlepping food to your table. There is a certain type of person who gets an absolute thrill, a high, and something that money can't buy, really, from just making your day better and having fun while doing it. And I seriously believe that those types of people are the ones that should be wedding vendors. They're the ones who make the whole thing incredible and fun and are your sunshine on a cloudy day, except for those photographers who prefer a little bit of a cloudy day because it's really nice for photos, of course. So how do we get that? First of all, you need to start with the right people. You need to choose the very best wedding vendors for you because they're different. A great wedding vendor for me might not be the same as a brilliant wedding vendor for you. So you've got to know who's going to work well with you on your particular type of wedding. And to do this, you can head on back to episode 70, how to book the best wedding vendors for your style, budget, and personalities, and go through there. I run through step by step how to research, find, and then book in the very best wedding vendors for you. But then from there, have you really dealt with a professional videographer before? Have you ever worked beside an officiant or celebrant? Have you dealt with a venue owner, a coordinator, a planner, a professional musician? It's highly likely, while you might have met some of these people in your general day-to-day life, you probably haven't been responsible for a large and or important event with a really decent budget of, let's face it, at least a few $1,000s. And essentially, you're going to be a project planner to a degree of attention to detail that possibly you've never dealt with before. So what I'm finding more and more with couples is that they pick the right people, but then they don't know what to expect. They don't know how to communicate with vendors in a way that is productive and efficient. and they don't know how much information that wedding vendors really need to be able to do their job properly. We want to go in with the best of intentions. We want to work really seamlessly with them, have fun doing it, and end up with a brilliant result at the end, all while being as efficient as possible because you're still working. You've still got your normal life, right? So that's what I'm bringing you in this quick and succinct podcast episode is basically a guidebook for you. How to get the best out of your wedding vendors for sure, but while motivating them, while empowering them to give their very best by being a great engaged couple, being a great client for them. So I'm going to go through the 5 main touch points: your communication with vendors, knowing your budget, understanding the fine print, your timelines and cutoff dates, and finally, how to get them excited, how to make them want to really extend themselves over and above what they actually need to do to make your wedding something truly spectacular. Let's get stuck into it. Unbridely is a community of pro wedding vendors who believe in freedom and integrity in weddings, giving you options, solutions, tips and tricks to create the experience and memories that you and your fiancé really want and deserve. Because we believe that weddings are a team sport. With how-tos, stories and interviews with recently married couples, we find out what went right and what they'd change if they could go back and do it all over again. I'm Camille and welcome to the Unbridely podcast. For couples who have just booked their wedding vendor team, I find they often come to me and they go, okay, so I've booked them in. Now what? And this is really where the rubber hits the road. This is where the really deep communication comes in, where you're exchanging information and ideas and making sure that you're both on the same page. And so for that reason, the number one point in how to get the best out of your wedding vendors is on the communication front. I know it can be perhaps the most boring and dry part. It might be the part where you go, yeah, I communicate well, but how? How are you communicating? When are you communicating? What are you communicating? It sounds basic, but it's actually really deeply layered, and I'd love to explain why. Let's have a think about, first of all the different ways that you could communicate with your wedding vendors. So you might have seen them on social media, you might have DM'd them, and you might have started a conversation that way. And so in that vein, you've got DMs in the back of your mind as a form of communication. You might have had a Zoom call, FaceTime call, some sort of video call with them. You may have emailed back and forth, maybe a pricing guide, maybe a quote, and then maybe the invoice. And so you've used email or the vendor's customer relationship management software or CRM. In addition, you might have a wedding website. All the info's on there, right? You might be in group chats like WhatsApp or Facebook for all of your wedding party, getting across what you're wearing, where you're going for certain events, things like that. And there might be text messages as well, going back and forth. So what's that? Like 6 or 8 different ways of communicating with anyone, but in particular your wedding vendors, so your venue, planner, your guests, all this information is going out. But let me just say right off the bat, anything other than an email, which has the time and date stamp on it, which sometimes, if you're doing a conversation where you send an email, they send an answer back, you leave that answer in the email, a conversation stream, so to speak, leaves room for error. So when I've chatted with other wedding suppliers, the ones I've worked with, the ones that I have in my membership, they tell me time and time again that one of the hardest things to do, because you've got to remember, they're not dealing with just one wedding. You are dealing with just one wedding, and, that's brilliant, and you should feel special, absolutely. But what you've got to just take into account, just for a second, you're a wedding photographer. You've got a couple of weddings coming up this weekend, a couple next weekend. So let's say 4 different sets of couples are in your immediate sort of front of mind. So when you get a phone call saying, This is Sarah from Sarah and Brenda's wedding coming up. There are 4 sets of couples that you've got on your mind. So you've got to work out which day that is. You've got to work out what venue that is and who they're actually talking about. We just wanted to make sure that you're able to stay until our sparkler farewell at 11:30. That was all good, wasn't it? Now you're put on the spot there. You've got to answer straight away. Is that what you've agreed to? Is that what they've paid for? Is that part of your package? Where is this venue anyway? There are so many questions swirling around in your head, and you're encouraged to give an answer straight away. It's almost impossible to keep a handle on all of these moving parts, as you'd know from just planning one wedding to having 4 that you're trying to navigate. It's near on impossible. And this is where things slip through the cracks. So please understand that unless it's something urgent, and if it's an emergency and it's the day of, call your vendor. Like, you can't wait for an email response to get back to something really crucial. But unless it's an emergency or a private matter, personal call, totally different. But if it's something of consequence, something that you actually need to have happened or need a serious answer on, please, please, please email it through to your wedding vendors. They'll be able to get to it in a time-sensitive fashion because they can see when that came in. They can also copy and paste it into your file or into their CRM, customer relationship management software, and make sure that your wishes are acted on. One of the things that wedding suppliers come to me about frequently is couples changing the start time of important aspects of their wedding, like the ceremony start time, like the speeches start time. When you've got a team of vendors around you, basically orbiting you like a satellite, then when you make a change, they'll need to make a change as well. And sometimes not everyone can make that change and make it still as good, effective, seamless, etc. So sometimes it requires for a vendor to have a different lens, a different start time, more notice, need to be in a different place. Sometimes there needs to be a second shooter with officiants or celebrants who are doing more than one ceremony a day, or they live a fair distance away from the ceremony venue. If they're not kept up to date about when the bloody thing starts, it's near on impossible to get things right. So in the communication bucket there, please don't change the start times or timing of any aspect of your wedding. Once you've agreed and once you've got it in your contract, especially things like ceremony start times and package start times, catering times, you can't just change it. It's crucial to touch base with all of the vendors that your time change may affect. This could be your venue coordinator, planner. It could be your caterer, makeup artist, hairstylist. If things are brought forward, they need to start earlier as well. And they might not have the capacity to be able to do that. Your florist might have to set up earlier. And as I said, your officiant or celebrant may need to just rock up earlier as well, or allow a greater travel time buffer. So please have a think about any changes and how they might impact your vendors. And while we're on communication with your vendors, something that's really important, and it might not seem that important to you, maybe planning your one and only wedding, is that when there is a question asked, a lot of the times from caterers and venues, they're the sort of vendors where you're needing to plan a long way in advance. They're needing to get staff in. They're needing to book maybe crockery, cutlery, glassware, decor. They're needing to pull things together well ahead of time. If they're asking you a question, it's in your best interests to get back to them as soon as possible. So replying to emails, returning phone calls. If you get a phone call from a wedding vendor, chances are it's pretty important because they won't just interrupt your day for a casual phone call, quick chat, quick catch up. 99% of the time, there's usually a really important reason why they've decided to give you a phone call. When I asked the unbridled suppliers what the most important things are for couples to get right in their interactions with wedding vendors, Adrian, who is a wedding coordinator at the beautiful Beach Road Wines in McLaren Vale, made sure to get me to pass on that responding promptly to emails, returning phone calls if you get one, is good for you. There is usually a reason. It could be that you haven't secured your venue yet and someone else is looking at your date and they need you to come back straight away to let them know. Otherwise, it could go. It might be an option with food that's changed. It could be a change in weather, which means that your ceremony can't be in a certain spot on the property and needs to be moved. And you need to have a chat about those contingency plans. It could be anything. And I know how hectic it is, especially if you don't have a planner, to work this all out yourself and coordinate your own wedding. But I just wanted to flag that it could be really important to get back to them. And it could be a case of them wanting to give you the options first before they move to another couple. Naomi runs the amazing The Manor up at the Basket Range in the Adelaide Hills. And she also wanted to make a point of, please don't text. Please don't text and call all the time. There's not that, as I said, time and date stamp that can be easily put into your file, your folder. You need to keep all that communication in the one spot and be organized. Get those final numbers, the menu selection, any out of the ordinary dietary requirements, your seating plans, all that sort of stuff. If you get that into your venue, your coordinator, your planner on time, then they can be more organized and they don't have to chase this information from you as well. And the lovely Bree for Marybank wanted to also pass on the timeliness aspect because contrary to what I just said, changes don't happen instantaneously. There's often a chain of people or other vendors, of things that need to be checked before changes can be made. So if you are contacting someone Monday and you expect an answer Monday, it's unlikely that's going to happen. So you need to be able to look at these things in advance, almost anticipate problems, which is really hard to do. Hopefully you've got great vendors who are doing this for you and actually seeing things as they're coming up and they're asking you proactive questions. But the bottom line is, don't leave things to the last minute. You'll get yourself into a really tight bind in that last month before your wedding. And the more you can push those tasks out of that last week, that last month, the more brain space you're going to have to free things up. Also, you're going to have some extra days up your sleeve for information to come back to you, for decisions to be made and to be relayed back to you. And I really do like this quote. Lack of planning on your part does not constitute an emergency on my part. That's rough, isn't it? While vendors are there to serve you, their patience and their time, their enthusiasm and their energy is finite. And sometimes what I encourage my couples to do is rather than sending an email every single week in the lead up, is to open an email, put my email address there and start putting bullet points. And when they've got 3 or 4 bullet points, then they shoot it through to me. Camille, we've just got a few questions. Bang, 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 bang. Could you get back to us when you can? Yes, I can. That is so, so good. I can see when they send it, see how important it is, answer back on those bullet points, super efficient, really good for everyone. And you know you haven't missed a thing. And they know they haven't missed a thing. So good communication also means being transparent. If you don't like or love a direction that a vendor is taking you in, whether that's your timeline, decor elements, suggestions, you really have to be upfront about it straight away because your intentions and your values matter. And a pro wedding vendor cares about that. So please let your vendor know and being honest with them. So whether that's with your budget, your family complications, or a dislike of something that's been added into your floral design, throughout your wedding planning journey, let them know. They want to know. They need to know if you're really not liking something. It's this feedback loop, and it establishes a foundation of trust and collaboration with your vendor team and builds a more enjoyable experience for you, both in the lead up, on the day, and afterwards as well. Great communication also helps you create a shared vision. Your vision for the wedding aligns with your suppliers and their understanding, and it's a cohesive and harmonious event. It's a coming together of minds. This will also prevent misunderstandings. If you discuss your expectations, your preferences, and any specific details, times are so important. I can't overemphasize this. Ditch the assumptions. It helps with efficient planning. Your wedding suppliers can better understand your needs, your preferences, your priorities, and it leads to a more streamlined and organized planning process. Discussing any budget constraints openly. It means that your vendors can tailor their services and recommendations to align with the money, with what you've got in the bank. It ensures that you've got a more realistic and sustainable financial plan. And this feedback loop, all of these wonderful benefits will reduce your stress because clear communication, it minimizes uncertainties and surprises, not the good surprises, the bad surprises. It will reduce stress for both you and your wedding vendors. Everyone involved can feel confident that they're working towards the same goals. And also with problem resolution, in the event that stuff comes up, there's challenges, there's weather problems, there's supplier issues, clear communication is absolutely essential for effective problem resolution. Openly discussing concerns, it helps to come up with collaborative solutions and it prevents misunderstandings from escalating beyond repair. Now, another thing you want to be crystal clear on is your budget. And adjusting or communicating guest number or time changes promptly if things change along the way. Frequently, there are misunderstandings and miscommunications that happen around minimum numbers or order amounts with venues, caterers, decor, and many other vendors. And worst case scenario, changes in your budget can sometimes mean that your vendors are unable to continue working with you for a host of different reasons. All those reasons aside, you need to know this as soon as possible. Your budget matters, and you really need to be across it from the start and check in periodically to make sure everything is still on track as you go along as well. If you had a sweary, chocolate-addicted, wine-sipping fairy godmother who could help you with your wedding planning, what would you wish for? Perhaps no more waking up in the middle of the night in a cold sweat, wondering what you've forgotten, or fretting about your RSVPs. Maybe no more spreadsheets or post-it notes or endless to-do lists. Well, I can help you with all of that. Wedsites is an Australian wedding website builder, guest management software, and wedding project planner all in one. Why is this such a game changer for you? Well, imagine everything to do with your wedding being in one place, updated in real time in the cloud, shareable to anyone else that's helping you, password protected for your guests, with notifications to tell you what needs to be done next and by when. It's amazing, right? I love how easy Wedsites is to set up and use and how there are no ads on the platform yelling at you to spend more money on your wedding. To get started on your very own free wedding website, just head to wedsites.com. That's WEDSITES.com and enter the code UNBRIDELYPOD, that's UNBRIDELYPOD, to get 10% off their paid planning tools. The link is in the show notes. So to wrap this up with the communications angle, the type of communication is really important and email is preferred. Please only call if it's an emergency. B, any changes that you make need to be in an email and you need to be checking with everyone that this affects and then confirm the change back to everyone. So there's touching base. We'd like to make this change. And then once everyone gets back saying, yes, it's possible, then another email. We would like to confirm this change. This is what we're doing. C, the timing of your communication. So great vendors should be letting you know ahead of time what the time frame is for their workflow, when you need to get certain things back to them. And so please respect, their opening hours, their working hours. And if you need to, shoot an email, but use that schedule send little button that can let you send things. If you're doing it in the middle of the night, then schedule send, get it delivered 9 a.m. the next morning. Perfect. Done. No one gets interrupted. It's all in their workflow. Everyone's happy. D, prompt, timely, making sure you get the information that your vendors need when they need it so they can keep doing their very best for you. And E, don't leave things till the last minute. Procrastinating is not going to help you. And if you need some advice or something before you make a decision and get back to people, let your vendors know. If you keep this nice and open, transparent, you're going to be great. The second way you can really get the best out of your wedding vendors is if they are present for your wedding meal. So if it's a wedding breakfast, then it's breakfast. It's the food you're serving at breakfast. If it's a high tea, it's the food at high tea. If it's a nighttime reception, it's dinner or tea time. It depends on where you are in the world. It's the meal that you eat in the evening. Please, if those vendors are with you, please feed your wedding vendors. There are some circumstances where a DJ, a videographer, an MC, a planner, a coordinator wouldn't need a meal at that time. If they're only working a short number of hours, then of course it's not necessary. But what I'm really referring to is those vendors who are with you for 7, 8, 9, up to 12 hours of their day. And during that part of your wedding, you might have a first dance, a cake cutting, speeches, a specific cultural ritual happening at that time. It could be different fun games that your MC has started and encouraging everyone to participate in. It could be any number of things. My point being that if your vendors require a meal at that time, they can't be leaving your venue, wherever that is, to go and get a meal. It's not ideal for them to be ducking off to McDonald's to go and get something while your speeches are on. It's not going to work. If they're only there for 2 hours, then that's fine. They're going to work through, aren't they? They're going to eat before or after. If they're there all frickin' day, then they can't. And it's unreasonable to expect them to. And this is something very specific to weddings and being employed directly by the couple getting married. There is this hospitality, understanding and clause and respect that goes both ways. So I'm not going to go through all of this now. You can come at me on social media if you want. I have a specific episode all about feeding your vendors. It's episode number 40, Wedding Vendor Meals Explained, How and When to Fuel Your Dream Team. So you can head back to episode 40, go through all that, and get all worked up about why you don't get fed at work. Okay, the third way to get the very best out of your wedding vendors is, it seems really simple, but especially with the cost of living crisis that we're going through at the moment, it's become a real thing that many couples are not paying their wedding vendors on time. Frequently, there are booking fees to be paid when you lock in a particular vendor, and then there are installments that get paid as your vendor does a certain stage of their work. So it's not unusual, for example, for when you're hiring furniture and decor and things like that, if things need to be procured, bought before your wedding, if there needs to be 150 of a certain type of plate, then those payments are made well before so they can be ordered, so they can be shipped, so they can be brought in, they can be cleaned, they can be gotten ready, counted through, made sure that there's no chips on them, and then get them ready. So there might be installment payments that are happening 6 months out, maybe even further out. And then once final numbers are confirmed, a couple of months or 1 month out, the final payment at that point. Now, more and more, vendors are finding, and I'm chatting with vendors all around the world, it's not restricted to a certain country, a certain state. It's not restricted to budget weddings or luxury weddings either. I think just the pricing pressure in general is really being felt across the board by pretty much everyone. And so I understand. And I think most vendors understand as well. But a lot of wedding vendors are sole traders. They work for themselves, and the money that you give them to work on your wedding quite literally goes towards their mortgage, their rent, the food that they consume. And so the respect for paying on time it feels very personal. And while most experienced wedding suppliers, they know it's not personal when you don't pay them exactly on time, it can feel that way. So there are a few different reasons why you do want to pay on time and why, again, this communication, this transparent communication between yourself and your dream team is really important. So paying on time makes sure that you've got priority. If you're talking about plates, that they are paid for, they are ordered, they are shipped, they are locked in, and also quality. When payments arrive late, it can sometimes mean that vendors are not able to secure what you're after, whether that be certain napkins, whether that be certain signage, whether that is a particular fabric for your gown. Recently, I had a couple and they wanted a certain photographer and they wanted them to come across to a rural destination, and we needed to get a ferry. And that payment came in a little bit late. It meant that the photographer couldn't get a seat on the ferry, which would have gotten them there at a certain time. Your payment has knock-on effects, and the time that you pay can affect your wedding vendors, especially if they just work on their own. Sometimes when there's teams, there can be a bit of flexibility there and there can be a bit of money in the kitty that sorts things out. But ultimately, you are paying for your service as you go. So paying on time makes sure that you get priority and you get quality. It avoids delays and it avoids your wedding vendor spending time chasing you for your payment. It means, hopefully, that they're more focused on doing the job that you have booked them for. And it also maintains your relationship. Not saying it's right, but for myself, sometimes, it feels a little bit personal when payments aren't made on time. And so please, if you think that you won't be able to pay on time, these are the transparent conversations that you need to have with your wedding vendors. Keep them on the same page so they know where you're at. Number 4, give your wedding suppliers the good stuff. Why did that sound so dirty? What I mean is the detailed stuff, the important stuff, basically filling them in on what takes priority for you, what's important, what's your story, what's your history. So especially with questionnaires for your wedding ceremony creation, your officiant, your celebrant, they've got a certain way of getting the best info from you. The story of how you met, what happened during your engagement, that tragic trip that you both took overseas that ended in disaster, all of those amazing touch points that make you you and that have defined you as a couple over the years, what you've been through, what you survived together, what you've achieved and what you're looking forward to in the future. That information is gold, absolute gold. And even for the photographers, the videographers, the content creators, they need to have some sort of insight, some sort of inkling about who you are, about what you love, about what you value, so they can build that into the story that they tell with their art and with their products and services. So your likes, your dislikes, your loves, are not just an annoying question in a questionnaire. Having this info gives a real richness to the ceremonies that are able to be written, and the beautiful videos and films that are able to be created for you. So please have a really good think. Set aside a bit of time and fill out those questionnaires and answer questions with the good stuff. And the fifth way to get the very best from your wedding vendors is to absolutely choose the great vendors. Choose the vendors that you're excited to get in contact with. You know, you see their name come up on an email and you're like, oh, it's you. Hi. You want that feeling. You know, you want people you can get along with really well, people who get you. But then the key after that point is to trust them. You've checked out their contracts. You've given them the good stuff. You've told them your likes and dislikes, but then you've got to let go and trust that their expertise and experience and their creativity is going to produce something amazing for you. It's the ultimate in respect to give creatives a bit of latitude. And if you're a bit nervous, if you are a type A personality, then just let them know that as well. Let them know, I'd love for you to come up with a concept for, I don't know, the floral installation above the reception dance floor. I'd love for you to come up with a concept for that. And I'm really happy for you to go all out with your creativity. But could you please send through those ideas and I'll just give it a final tick. Rather than micromanaging, rather than stepping all over the process and not trusting the professionals who frequently have had many, many years of doing this. So the lovely Tony from Wilson and Lewis Photography says you need to choose well, choose your vendors well, and then trust. So he says, trust your wedding photographer, because he's a wedding photographer, to be creative and allow them to take the types of photos they are best at. Micromanaging your photographer with style boards of trendy photos that you want them to recreate will stifle their creativity. Each photographer has their own unique style. You need to embrace it to get their best work. And Carolyn Uphill from Sweet Nothing Flowers absolutely agrees. And she says, I think this goes for so many vendors, but find a florist whose work you love and trust them to do their thing. Guidance with inspo photos and a colour scheme that we've come to together is perfect, but then let us run wild. And so just to recap, the 5 different ways you can get the best out of your wedding vendors are: number 1, communications. All communication, clear, timely, prompt, transparent. Email is preferred. Making sure you work with everyone on any changes and confirm those changes. Respecting working hours. Don't leave things to the last minute, and being as clear and as honest as you can is undoubtedly the best way to have a great relationship with your wedding vendors. Number 2 is to feed them if they're working over a meal period and for an extended amount of time. Number 3 is to pay them on time. Number 4 is to give up the good stuff, all the juicy information about you, all the stuff that you want them to include, your likes, your dislikes. Give them a little window into your relationship and they'll deliver something epic back for you. And number 5, choose your great vendors, but then trust them. Trust them to come up with something special and unique for you and deliver the wedding of your dreams. I'd love to hear your experience of dealing with wedding vendors, of working with wedding vendors, and how you've helped them to produce the very best product or service they can for you. And you can DM me on Instagram @unbridely, and I'll chat with you next week. That about wraps it up for this episode of the Unbridely podcast. For the links and resources we mentioned, please head to the show notes. And if you love the show, please review and subscribe on the podcast platform you're on now so you don't miss out on a single episode. Thanks so much for listening. And remember, weddings are a team sport. Catch you soon.